Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. I get a lot of questions and comments about the books that you can see behind me. Some people are just trying to read the spines on the book covers. Some people have asked if I would give a tour of my knitting library, and others ask, well, could I give a top 5 or top 10 knitting book recommendation list? What I'm going to do today is give you an overview of my knitting library because it consists of more than what you can see behind me. And then I will give some recommendations for general knitting reference books, stitch dictionaries, and design books. There are far more categories than that in my library and more categories than that I could talk about, but those are going to be the fundamental ones that I think might be of primary interest. So let's get to the tour of my library. So this is my video studio. You can see I have the table where I record things. I've got my lights. And then behind me is that bookcase that you see when I am filming videos. Over against this wall right here is my desk. And so that's where I spend most of my day, is at this desk. That's where I knit, that's where I watch videos myself. But if I'm doing work like designing or trying to figure out a technique video or something like that, then the books that I reach for are going to be very close to me. The books that I reach for the most for knitting techniques are going to be this book, the Knitter's Handbook by Monsey Stanley. It is, I believe it's out of print, but you can probably get it used. I find it's just got an incredible amount of information. It's mostly, I mean, there are some color pictures in here, but it's mostly illustrations explaining things. But there's a huge number of cast-on methods. Everything that she explains in there, whether it's like an increase, she will tell you how to do it so that it's slanted left, slanted right, doing it from the purl side. She'll tell you every different way of doing that, which a lot of books don't do that. This is a really valuable source. This book, Big Book of Knitting by Katharina Buss, is translated from German. It has interesting techniques that I don't see in English, other English language books like that are originally published in English. It's an older book and it's probably out of print now too, but again, you could get it used. Really interesting techniques in here. Then there's Principles of Knitting. This is, you know, a really encyclopedic volume. Still, sometimes things that aren't in this book. So that you're never going to get one book that literally has everything. It just isn't possible. I really didn't like this book when I first got it because I found it difficult to look up something by a specific name. And that's because she finds knitting terms to be ambiguous. She has created her own system of unambiguous names that are related to what they do or what they are, but you don't always know, especially if you're a newer knitter, you're not going to know what is this related to a technique I saw on YouTube. But it is a good way. If you want to learn things, you go to the chapter on casting on and you can read through these different methods. You can try them out and you can understand how things are related. So it's a really good book. You just have to understand how it's set up and how to take advantage of it. When I am looking up a technique or thinking about doing a technique video, I might know one way or two ways of doing something, and I will often pull these books out and see what they have in there and what they might have that's different, how they might explain things in a way that I wouldn't have thought of, or how, just if there's another way of doing things that I didn't know about. I think the first 3 general knitting reference books I got were this book called The Knitter's Book of Finishing Techniques, the Monsey Stanley Knitter's Handbook, and the Big Book of Knitting. Early on, like 20 years ago when I was first starting the Master Hand Knitting program, I didn't use Big Book of Knitting at all. I did use the Monsey Stanley book a lot, still use that one a lot. And I did refer to this one a lot at the beginning. I don't use this one anymore. I would say that it has 90 to 95% of the basic everyday techniques that most knitters are going to need. As I moved on and wanted to refine my knitting techniques, I moved away from this. I still think it's a really good book. It is just not it's just one that I've outgrown. And I think that can happen when you're knitters. What you need early on versus what you need later can change. So this is very portable. It will lie flat. It's got color photographs and good explanations in there. And I do think it's a decent book. I don't know if it's still in print, but you can probably get it used. But if you're on the early end of your knitting career and you want something that's portable and that's going to have most things you need, this book is going to be good for that. If I am in search of stitch patterns and I'm not sure what I'm looking for, and it might be lace, it might be cables, it might be just some kind of texture, Barbara Walker's Treasury books really are unbeatable. The big disadvantage of them is that they were written in the late 60s to early 70s. They assumed flat knitting for most things. So the pictures are black and white and they're written for flat knitting. There's no charts. And if you want it charted or you want to be able to use it in the round, you're going to have to chart it yourself and you have to understand how to do that. But they are huge, wonderful resources. This is the first Treasury. Second Treasury is even bigger. It's got really everything from knit pearls to slip stitch patterns, including mosaic, which she wrote a chapter on that in this book. Cables, lace, eyelet patterns, edgings, you name it, she's got it. Her third Treasury is charted knitting designs, where she basically developed the way that we chart things today. A lot of the symbols that she developed back in the 70s for charting knitting patterns come from this book, and she did it with pencil and pen. So she has these innovations of what are called closed cables in here. She calls them closed ring cables, where you just start, or you create a cable out of the background. It doesn't start at the bottom edge, and you can close them at the top. So she created this, and then she extended that chapter on mosaic knitting into an entire book. She literally wrote the book on mosaic knitting. So Barbara Walker books, can't recommend them highly enough, but again, most of them aren't charted. The mosaic and charted, the third and fourth books here are charted, but these first two are not. My favorite type of texture knitting is cables, and specifically I like the Bavarian Austrian traveling twisted stitch patterns. These were published in a museum. It's 3 booklets, but they are translated to English. There's really not much text. It's mostly charts. Twisted Stitch Knitting by Schoolhouse Press. You can get this all in one volume and in English. And then this is again out of print. This is the second edition of this. I got these when they came out the second time. And these are fantastic. These are especially like for socks and stockings, they've got all these really fantastic stitch patterns. A lot of people will look at these patterns and think they look like Japanese stitch patterns, and the Japanese ones certainly borrowed from these traditional patterns. They have a lot of these traveling twisted stitch patterns, but these are ones that are my favorites. And then more recently, books that I like are by Cecilia Capochiaro. She came out with this book first, Sequence Knitting. These are really good stitch patterns for things that you're knitting. You can do things in the round as well, but it's like commuting type of knitting where you learn this sequence and you can just keep repeating it. You don't have to keep referring to a pattern. So it's really great for scarves, shawls, blankets. Can also be used in the round in different ways. So she developed this first, and it's a huge stitch dictionary, and she's got examples of the charts and then what they look like on both sides. So the idea is that these things are reversible. They may not be the same on both sides, but tend to be reversible. Then she came out with Making Marls, which is a way of combining multiple strands of yarn into different colors and different ways that you can use these to transition through from one color to another or as a gradient. Again, using sequence knitting so that these things are also reversible. And then this is her newest one, Reversible Knitting. And she always goes into how you can create these patterns yourself. So these are patterns that truly look the same exactly on both sides. So her books are really great and really include a lot of technical information about how you can just use the patterns that are presented or how you can develop your own. If you don't think you can handle Barbara Walker's stitch patterns that are flat, this is a good one that's more contemporary by Melissa Liepman. She might have some other stitch dictionaries too, I don't know. But what's nice about these, that photographs are in color. She has charts. She tells you how to use them if you're knitting flat versus in the round. They're divided up into different sections like cables versus lace or open work. And basic knit purl patterns in there. So I really like this one, and I do reach for this one quite a bit. So in addition to books that are just devoted stitch dictionaries, I also have a number of books on traditional knitting, whether it's Aran sweaters, Ganzis, Danish sweaters, Fair Isle, other traditions that have stranded color work. A lot of those books have things like history, general references if it's for a specific type of item like mittens or socks or sweaters or something like that. There will be information about those types of garments included in those books. So that's where I get a lot of stranded color work. It's from those types of books, which I didn't include in the general stitch dictionaries. I do have one shelf that has all my Elizabeth Zimmerman books as well as this book from Barbara Walker. If you want to understand where we came from as knitters today, these two books are really great for a couple of reasons. They explain how to design and knit a sweater that's going to fit you. So how to approach doing that. Now, Barbara Walker, she's doing all kinds of things from the top. She's doing skirts and various other kinds of things. But this was the first book about knitting sweaters from the top down that included more than just a raglan. She's got two different ways of doing set-in sleeves. She's got yoke sweaters, I believe, and as well as raglans, and possibly some other things. So this is where all of this top-down knitting started with, is her. And so you can read through and see the basic information about how to approach knitting something for yourself. So you could use more updated top-down techniques based on other sweater patterns you've used, but instead of being a slave to the pattern, you can figure out, well, how do I measure for myself? How do I get the fit that I want using the elements I want? Elizabeth Zimmerman preferred knitting bottom up. And so she has other seamless ways of knitting, including set-in sleeves going bottom up. But both of these are more conversational. It's not a written pattern that you can just follow. It's explanations. So you would need to take notes and figure out what you're doing so that you get this process. So you're not going to be able to open this book and just start knitting directly from this, knitting a pattern from there. It's telling you how you go about setting this up for yourself. But both of these are the instrumental books in terms of freeing knitters from patterns dating back to the early 70s. So these are all books that I keep pretty close within reach of my desk. So the first category are these books by Ann Budd. They're called the Knitter's Handy Book series. So the first one was the Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns. It has mittens, gloves, scarves, hats, a few types of sweaters. So all of those basic types of garments. So they'll have a schematic and they will have child sizes and adult sizes. The schematic will have all of the measurements for each of the different sizes. And then the particular garment can be knit with different gauges, anywhere from 3 stitches per inch, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And so then you go across, here's the gauge you have, and then here's the size that you have over here, and it tells you the number of stitches that you start with. And then it's a different layout for pattern writing but it's a way that doesn't require you to have a pattern for every single thing you knit. So if you knit fairly simple things, you're not trying to modify them, you just want basic sizes, standard sizing, then this is a really good way to go. It doesn't mean you can't modify things. It just means that if you really rely on patterns, but you don't want to have to buy a pattern for every single person in every single size, and you're knitting basic sweaters, which you may or may not want to apply stitch patterns to. This is a good starting point. This is, again, got all kinds of patterns. Then she's got her handy book of sweater patterns. These are all bottom up, flat, in pieces, I believe, which may not be your cup of tea, but this was published a good 15, 20 years ago. But then she's got a series of books for top-down sweaters. And if you compare the schematics on these two books, you will notice that these tend to be slimmer in the arms. There are just a little bit differences in how they're shaped, and that reflects changing fashion. So how a sweater tells you to knit something in 1970 versus 1990 versus 2025, those proportions might be a little bit different. Information on how you measure yourself is probably going to be the same. Recommended ease or the style of sweater that you might be knitting from that era is going to vary. These books are actually designing your own sweaters. So this is a classic. It's by Maggie Righetti. Again, it was published quite a while ago. And so some of the styles and examples in here might not be terribly current. They're probably mostly for bottom-up knitting, not top-down knitting. This one is from Shirley Payton. I haven't actually looked through this one. I've had it for a while, but it was recommended. But this is one, again, a comprehensive design guide to hand knits. This one takes Elizabeth Zimmerman's concepts that she developed in the 70s and it extends them a little further so that you have maybe more guidance about how to design something for yourself. Amy Herzog's Ultimate Sweater Book is really good, particularly for contemporary designs, top down. She's got a lot of information about selecting the right yarn too for your sweater design and looking at how it's structured, how is the yarn structured versus, where's the structure coming from in the sweater. Really excellent book. A lot of information in here about things like yoke sweaters and other types of sweaters that are maybe more popular these days. This is called Knitting in the Old Way. So these are how to knit sweaters, ethnic sweaters from different regions, different cultures, and what those traditional styles are like, and basically what the formulas are for knitting those. So if you're doing a yoke sweater, what the proportions are based on maybe your chest measurement and how you go about calculating those sorts of things. So they have all these different types of sweaters and how you go about designing for that, how you apply your stitch patterns, things like that. This is a really good book for understanding how those traditional sweaters are built, but you can take what you apply from these traditional sweaters and apply it to something that's maybe a little bit more modern as well. So there really are a lot of different approaches for how to design a sweater, and it really depends on what kind of sweater you want, what it is you're imagining, how much hand-holding you need versus how much you just want to release your own creativity and do everything from scratch. If you would like to see a fairly complete list of the books in my library, I will leave a link down below. You can see it on Ravelry in my Ravelry notebook. I have my Ravelry library and my physical books that I have entered into my library, as well as magazines and booklets and other sorts of things are listed there. Not every single book or booklet that I own is in my Ravelry library because they're not all in the general Ravelry database, and you won't be able to see any patterns that I've purchased from Ravelry and have downloaded into my library. You will only be able to see the physical books that I have entered into my library. But there are about 200 books and close to 100 booklets and 75 or so magazines. So there are literally hundreds and hundreds of publications that I do have listed in my Ravelry library, and you can look through those as you please. Well, that's it for this week's Technique Tuesday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.